promises of creating more transparency, cracking down on corruption, more affordable housing, and diversifying Hawaii's economy. As another session comes to a close at the state legislature, did lawmakers follow through on all the priorities they laid out at the beginning of the year? We look at the measures that made it to the governor's desk, which ones didn't, and what happens next. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. More than 200 bills passed and a budget bill of more than $38 billion is now waiting for the governor's approval. It's been a busy session for state lawmakers and the governor's administration. Tonight we're joined by leaders in the legislature to talk about what they were able to hammer out over weeks of public hearings and private negotiations. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Representative Lauren Matsumoto is the State House Minority Leader. Born and raised in Mililani, she began serving in the House in 2012. Separate from her role in the legislature, she just received a doctorate in organizational development. Representative Scott Psyche is the State House Speaker. He was first elected to the House in 1994. In addition to serving as a state representative, Psyche is a practicing attorney specializing in disability law. Senator Ron Kochi is the State Senate President, representing Kauai and Niihau. Kochi has served in the Senate since 2010. He previously served on the Kauai County Council for 22 years. Chad Blair is a reporter and editor at Honolulu Civil Beat. He also has taught at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Honolulu Community College, Hawaii Pacific University, and Chaminade University of Honolulu. And political analyst Colin Moore is an associate professor and the chair of the School of Communication and Information at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm going to start off, I don't usually do this, I'm going to start off with a question. It's directed to Chad, but let both Chad and Colin Moore answer. The end of the session was described as chaotic by multiple longtime legislators. Civil Beat went so far as to call it an expletive show. Mr. Blair, can you go more into why you think this is the case, and to the legislative leaders here, what can be done to fix it? That's from Pablo in Waimanalo.
Thanks, Pablo, for the question. Yeah, it's a family program. We're not going to use profanity, but I did hear a lot of profanity being used, particularly on the last day of conference committee on April the 28th, and certainly on the final day, May 4th, that the session ended. I think what happens when so many good things occurred, millions of dollars for affordable housing, for homelessness, Medicaid reimbursement, any number of accomplishments, I think they tend to get clouded by what is a problem with transparency and accountability. And what happened on the last day of conference committee when this so-called cattle call happened, it was called by the speaker and the president, and you saw this mad rush of lawmakers all cramming into conference room 309 to hastily try and meet that 6 o'clock deadline, and dozens of bills fell by the wayside, including some pretty important sunshine bills. And then on the final day of session in the speaker's chamber, you saw a number of representatives rise to speak in protest about the process that led to the budget being crafted. The budget wasn't signed off until the very last day of session. Complaints about process, complaints about not actually seeing what they're voting on. And I think that's the cloud, the chaos that so many people are talking about.
Colin Moore, do you think that that is the primary thing that we should remember about this legislature?
Well, I think it's the thing we are going to remember about this legislature. I think we'll get into a lot of the good things that were passed in this legislature, really tremendous, I think, bills for working families. But I think that is going to be what a lot of people take away from this. And Chad is right. I mean, I think there were a lot of bills that got left on the table. I mean, you listen to people speed reading through bills. It doesn't give voters a lot of confidence. And I guess my question is, why do we need to do this? I mean, there was a constitutional amendment proposed this session to move to a continuous legislature. Hawaii's legislature is already pretty professionalized. I mean, legislators are compensated fairly well. They have fairly large staffs compared to states like Wyoming or New Mexico, where there's barely anyone there. But I think the question I would offer to the group is, why not move to a continuous session where they meet every month, maybe increase legislative salaries, but forbid outside employment? Maybe that would lead to a more rational way to review the bills, give everyone a chance to weigh in. And I think also to help the public feel like the process is a little more transparent. I think that's the thing that concerns me. I mean, deadlines can be useful, sure, but I think when the public sees what we've called the cattle call, I think that's concerning because it gives them less faith in the process.
Lauren Matsumoto is the lone Republican who was not responsible for the cattle call. How do you feel about that label on the session as chaotic?
I would say, and I've said this before, this probably has been the most insane session that I've been a part of in my now 11 years in the legislature. And I think there's a lot of different reasons to that. I mean, we can talk about process. I've been an advocate for working on the process and the culture of the building since I've first been elected. But I think one of the things is 50% of our legislature is in their first or second term. This is probably in the House. It's the newest legislature that we've had. And so I think there's a lot of people that were still getting up to speed. Many of our committee chairs, it was their first time ever being a committee chair. And for the end, I remember the first week of conference, we did nothing, right? And so I think that's where everything got bunched up at the end. And so there is a lot to talk about process, but there's so many factors I think that went into it this legislative session. Okay,
Speaker Psyche, I'll let you respond, but I'll put it in the form of a question. I mean, what did happen, and is it going to happen again?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll admit that it was chaotic on that Friday afternoon, but I'll also say that this was not the first time that we've had a cattle call during the conference period. I think over the past 7 years, we've been able to avoid a cattle call, but prior to that, it did occur before. This one, I think, there were more bills at stake in this time, and what happened that on Friday that afternoon was I called Kochi. Kochi and I spoke. I think it was about 10.
It's President Kochi.
Sorry, President Kochi.
We're friends. That's perfectly fine.
But we spoke at about 10 in the morning because we were monitoring bills, the bill flow, and we realized that there were a bunch of bills that were going to be bunched up towards the end of the day. And so a couple hours after, we said we would continue to monitor that situation. A couple hours later, we spoke again, and we decided to convene all of the conference committees in a single room. And that was really meant to just provide some coordination that day so that you didn't have 50 conference committees meeting after 4:30 p.m. in 7 different conference rooms.
It would have been impossible.
Right, want to consolidate everybody in one room starting at 4:30.
Senator Kochi, President Kochi, what do you want to say about that situation?
Well, first of all, what the speaker said is an accurate timeline. And what would have been a better process, at least in my chamber, is to have anticipated maybe if we got here, what did the leadership think about it, or ideally have an opportunity to talk to the caucus. But none of that occurred. The speaker and I talked, and on behalf of the Senate, I made a decision in working with the speaker that we didn't want to see a lot of good bills potentially die. We would go to the cattle call, and so no one should look at anybody else in the Senate but me for the decision, to do the cattle call. And I got very little attention paid to comments that I was making at the beginning of session. Most of the focus was about the governor, his new cabinet, who was going to be leading the governor's team. What was the governor's relationship between the House Speaker with myself? And I kept trying to say at those before session meetings, what really is going to be challenging, in my opinion, is exactly what the minority leader said. How are those relationships going to work between the committee chairs? In my chamber with Senator Taniguchi, Nishihara, and Baker retiring, you lost 90 years of legislative experience. And, with the lieutenant governor being elected, she and Senator De La Cruz, as the money chairs, had worked together for a long period of time. And so there was a level of trust. There was a budget document that they kept building on year after year.
I think that's a really valid point. I mean, you saw a sort of, I'm not going to call it a decapitation, but there was a lot of changes, particularly on the House side. But I want to go to another question that kind of goes to the heart of this, I think. Do you think that there are inequities in the concentration of power in the legislative process? And would you ever consider changing internal rules to level the playing field? This is Alexis from Waikiki. Chad, let me ask you though, is this process really the result of an inequity of power? That there's a small number of people that have the power and a large number of people that don't?
The people that have the power, two of them are sitting here in this room, and the other two are the money chairs. Kyle Yamashita, new to his position for finance in the House, as well as Donovan Dela Cruz carrying on in WHAM. And I respect what the president has to say about the process and the new leadership and the different people, but some of those bills, particularly by the judiciary chairs, Carl Rhodes and David Tarnas, had very little disagreement, and they were simply waiting for release, for a sign-off from WHAM and from Finn, and they couldn't get it. It wasn't like it took 3 months to get there. They were this close, and then they were just mysteriously killed for no good reason. The bill that would have provided comprehensive public financing of elections, you even had dollar amounts that were agreed to, and then suddenly it was changed dramatically twice, even 3 times in the last 48 hours. Why does that have to happen? Yes, you do need to reduce the power of committee chairs.
Colin?
I mean, it doesn't seem like a bad idea to me. I mean, I even think cross-nationally, Hawaii has particularly powerful finance committee chairs, and I'm not sure, I mean, maybe the Speaker, Senate President could correct me. I mean, this notion that every bill has to be released from the finance committees, I'm not sure that's true among many state legislatures. So it does seem to create an extra veto point and where things can get really clogged up at the end. But I mean, I do think that Senate President is right, is that part of this was due to the inexperience. And I've heard a lot of members of the House in particular criticize the new House Finance Chair, Kyle Yamashita. I mean, Sylvia Luke and Donovan Dela Cruz worked very well together. Sylvia Luke was a master of details. I think Senator Dela Cruz is sort of a master of the art of the possible and knowing what all of his members want. So I think part of this was due to inexperience.
Speakers, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. One of the areas that we'll be working on improving in the House is the communication between the chairs, between the leadership, between the members, so that everybody understands what's happening. I think the lack of communication on Friday kind of led to some of the chaos that we saw.
I just got a question. What is a cattle call? And I thought we explained it pretty well, but the idea is everybody goes to the same place, just like cows going to the barn at the end of the night, right? But anybody know the origin of that as applied to the state legislature?
Nope.
No, it's just
I have no idea.
term of art.
We're a more agrarian economy, so we probably had some good ranchers
You might
in
be
the
the last island
legislature
with cows on it, I think.
that identified it.
And Daryl, you didn't want to ask the minority member about the power differences?
No, please, go ahead. You guys could jump in like that anytime you want.
Yeah, no, I wanted to bring up, we have the most unbalanced legislature in the entire nation. And I think when we talk about committee chairs and their power, as being someone in the super minority, just seeing your bills die year after year after year and then getting passed by somebody else. I'm happy that they get passed, but just bringing around a new culture where I think for years, I think we're working on that, where it's not we just kill Republican bills. I know Speaker and I have sat down many times to talk about that, but that's kind of been over the years the tradition. And I'm hoping we can really work, because we have so many new members, not to have some of that power dynamics with the chairs where we're just not going to hear Republican bills or we're not going to pass them out. And so I think there's a possibility to really change that dynamic and shift it a little bit, even though we are the super minority.
Well, let me just ask. I mean, what do you think the chances are there's going to be? This is the best year for Republicans in a long time in the elections. I mean, do you expect that it's going to get better in this state?
Of course it is.
In the numbers?
Yes, I do think it is. It's really been interesting in the last year to see the shift on the west side. I think when you're looking at it, if you're talking about campaigns, I do think there's a possibility, and I do think people are looking for some balance. I think it's important to be able to have different voices, so I do think we're going to pick up a few seats.
I would agree with that, and I would just add, even with 8 Republicans, 2 in the Senate and 6 in the House, one of your own members challenged the other 5, actually used the word cult to describe the minority in the House. And then on the Senate side, I don't think we ever got a Senate majority leader. Did Kurt Favela and Brent Nawal ever agree?
I don't think Senator Kanuha lost his job yet.
Minority leader.
We didn't get a minority
Thanks for the correction on that one. A minority leader. Maybe one day, probably not.
Okay, we're really getting into inside baseball now. Okay, so yeah, people at home are going, what are they talking about? But we might as well go there, Chad. So tell us what the cult story is about.
This was a story by Kevin Dayton, my colleague at Civil Beat, and it concerns Kanani Souza, who I believe is new to the State House, and having some disagreements with the philosophy behind some of the bills and some of the power. I'm sure the minority leader can explain better her exceptions, her concerns. I think there was even some talk that she might feel more comfortable in the Democratic Party, but the word cult was used, a direct quote from Representative Souza. Fairly or not, there certainly are elements in the Republican minority caucus that are very opinionated in terms of their beliefs.
Well, let me put the question to you as well, though, because, I mean, I think even objectively, some of the things that your three more conservative religious members were saying on the floor were shocking to people, essentially denying that transgender exists, that gay exists, and claiming that there was, no room for supporting those parts of our population. How hard is it for you as a leader to work with this kind of diversity of opinions, and how do you feel about some of the things that they said on the floor?
I don't think they're actually denying that any of those things exist. But I'll tell you, maybe I'll go for the direction of what my philosophy of leadership has been. So as you know, this is my first year in the minority leader role. I've never put my name in before. But this year I saw an opportunity because we had 4 new members to, again, I talk about culture, changing the direction, really laying that foundation of what the Republican caucus can be. And so my philosophy for leadership is I don't try to control any of my members. They can say what they want on the floor. They're elected out of their own right. So they're saying what they want to say, and they have to, own up to that in November. So the next November. And so I don't try to control what they say. And so actually my statement that I've said many times that we're the most cohesive caucus that I've ever experienced in my entire decade is not false. We actually work really well together, even with Representative Souza opting out. And that's always been her choice. If she didn't want to meet with us, the door was always open. I think that was something that was very clear from the get-go. And she can vote however she likes and say whatever she would like to say.
Can I add something real fast, Dara?
Yeah, please.
Because I've said this to Lauren before, but Lauren has just been a breath of fresh air, and I support her 100% as a Republican leader. And we've worked very closely together to make her caucus work as well as my caucus. I think what she's experiencing is what I experience, where you have a caucus where you are seeing demographic and generational shifts occurring, and that's happening on both sides.
Professor Moore, give me context of all this. Compare it to what you've seen before, and so on.
Well, I mean, for the Republicans.
Yeah, well, it's just the things that were said, the things that happened in this legislature.
In terms of the Republican caucus, I do think you see a divide that you see nationally as well. Sort of the more pragmatists, and I would put, Representative Matsumoto in that camp. People really trying to get stuff done, concerned about ethics. And I think that there are some cultural conservatives, maybe more like Representative Pierik, who are echoing, I think, a lot of the culture war politics we've seen on the mainland. To my mind, Hawaii Republicans have always been most successful when they've been focused on criticizing the Democrats, which are not always beloved in this state, the Democratic Party of Hawaii, and focusing on good government, anti-corruption issues. I think that's always been their strength, to offer voters an alternative. And I think when they start to go down the path of culture war politics, I think that really turns off a lot of voters. So I do think there's an opportunity to elect more Republicans, particularly on the West Side. They're coming off of a very successful year. But I think those voters want to hear them focus on issues, cost of living issues, things like that, not this culture war.
Speaking of focusing on issues, let's start doing that. So this is Hector and Haleiwa. Last year, we know that 15,000 residents moved from Hawaii. What, if anything, is being done by legislature to stop people from leaving? Senate President Kochi, I know that was a primary issue for you.
Well, the several areas, first of all, is the $1 billion investment to have an array of homes that hopefully residents can afford. I think the high cost of housing is the greatest impediment to retaining or recruiting employees. The assistance that was approved to help the Alice families, hopefully it will put more money in the pockets of our residents. And we're continuing to look at how we can diversify the economy, but that has been challenging. I think one of the areas I've advocated for strenuously is in our park reservations system, that we should have links to buy made in Hawaii. And as visitors are coming and using our facilities, they would have an opportunity to see the incredible things that are happening by small craftspeople across this state, and they should be benefiting from the tourists that come here.
Speaker Psyche, what do you feel were the most significant steps toward this, either cost of living or diversification?
Yeah, so when the session began, one of the messages that the House sent was that we wanted to use the surplus to capitalize funds within state government that could help working families. And I agree with everything that the Senate President just mentioned. One other item that I would add is an appropriation that we made for a program called GEMS, GEMS, and it was a $100 million appropriation. And the GEMS was set up maybe about 10 years ago. It's a state program, and it's basically a fund that is used to help finance programs for lower income households, lower income residences. The $100 million that we appropriated for GEMS will be used to assist the residents, low-income residents, in obtaining solar, PV, and battery systems at their homes. And the way GEMS is set up is that it's capitalized, and it basically issues loans to families that otherwise would not be able to qualify for conventional loans or financing. So it's a pay-as-you-go system over 20 years. This GEMS appropriation is really important because I think GEMS is now going to be in a position to obtain maybe up to $200 million in matching funds. You'll have a $300 million fund set there that could potentially benefit 10,000 low-income families. And when you think about it, if you have a PV system on your rooftop, then you're not really paying your electricity bill anymore, which could be for families run up to $300, $400 a month. That'll be a big game changer for them.
Chad, what things did you see that they did that could impact this drain?
Well, I like the millions going to Kauhale, these tiny homes. I don't know if that would be an incentive for someone to live here, to move into a tiny home, but I do think...
Or come here.
Or to come here for that matter. But I do think that is showing progress. I mean, the House and the Senate, I would agree with the minority as well, and the governor, really were on the same page when it came to affordable housing, tax credits, tax incentives to help people earn income, tax credit getting doubled, I think, is that the state share? Those are significant things. They're not sexy, but they are going to actually help people. We talk about the Alice population and how that population is growing and growing, but that's going to take a while. It's not going to change things overnight, but those were some of the good stories out of the ledge.
Lord Matsumoto, what do you think progress was made there?
I think we passed a lot of good bills with housing. Doubling the earned income tax credit is one of my favorite bills. We did some great things with preschool as well, because trust me, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I know how much preschool costs. It's really difficult. But I think we could have taken it a step further. I really wanted to see us really listen or have a hearing on the bill to eliminate GET on food and medical services. And I know it's something that Governor Green talked about during his campaign. It's something that the Republicans have put in that bill for decades. And that's something that would have helped families immediately. They don't have to wait for that tax credit. It's immediate relief. It applies to everybody, and they don't have to go through any hoops to get it. It happens just as they're shopping.
Colin Moore, can you describe what we did, what process went through with the tax system? Because it seems like there was a lot of talk about really dramatic tax reform. In the end, it doesn't seem like it was all that dramatic.
Well, it is. I mean, it's very generous. It's not as dramatic or, I think, as aggressive as Governor Green proposed in his full gap plan. That would have provided, I think, a little more relief to middle-class families. But what was done is pretty significant. And let me give you an idea of how this actually affects people's day-to-day lives. Because EITC, dependent care tax credit, what does all that mean? What it means is this. Imagine a single mother with 2 kids making $45,000 a year. A lot of families look like that here, spends $5,000 on childcare. That's not atypical. What the ledge just did this session is going to reduce her tax liability by $1,300. That's a lot of money. That's 20 tanks of gas. So that's real relief. And it took a while, I think, for the ledge to warm up to EITC. I mean, it was proposed a lot of times, but now I think we have one of the the most over the last few sessions. We've developed what I think, I was talking to Speaker about this might be one of the most generous state level EITCs in the country now, whether it's first or fourth, I'm not sure, but it's incredibly generous. So these policies are putting real money in the pockets of working families.
Senate President,
Darryl, can I just add that I think Hawaii will be ranked 4th when it comes to the EITC, and the EITC here could impact or could help 200,000 households.
But doesn't our excise tax just take that whole progressive move and just fly right in the face of it, since the excise tax is so regressive?
Well, a couple of years ago, the legislature made the EITC refundable, which means that there's a greater rebate to these families.
Senate President Kochi, do you see revisiting, given that at the end of the session, I think it was said that there was a $500 million carryover, there was a $500 million put into the rainy day fund as well. There seemed to be a lot of money left on the table at the end of session. Do you see revisiting that and maybe looking down the line at some more tax relief?
And the email I got yesterday said, based on what we did in 2028, the state will be $48 million in the red. We budget on a 6-year cycle and not on annual. We passed the biennium budget, but we need to look out for 6 years. So we'll take a look, but I didn't think there was much confusion. Governor Green made his statement in the State of the State. The Speaker and I immediately said the same thing. We were concerned to have a simple mechanism, and we were concerned in helping the Alice families first and foremost. And we never wavered from pursuing that. I'll be happy to revisit it if we have a strengthened economy and we can go in that direction. I'm open to looking at it, but as far as what we wound up doing this year, we've been consistent in what the Speaker and I have been saying.
Chad, you got 15 seconds on tax reform?
Oh, God, that's 14 seconds too much, Darryl, but thank you.
Okay. Another thing that there seemed to be some strides on was health care. The change in the Medicaid reimbursements for doctors, and I was surprised the tuition repayment for doctors. Speaker, why so much emphasis on health care this year?
Well, I mean, we have a total commitment to recruitment, the training, recruitment, and retention of doctors in Hawaii. We know we've been hearing for years that there is a physician shortage in Hawaii, especially on the neighbor islands and in the rural areas. So we wanted to, I think, and this is where Governor Green provided some leadership as well, where he brought to the table proposals to increase Medicaid reimbursements to help with the loan program. The other program that we approved is an expanded ACT program for homeless, for the mental health assisted community treatment.
What is that about?
That's going to enable the judiciary to help make referrals for people who are brought to court who have mental health issues.
And then there was a significant capital improvement investment into the state hospital system as well. Most of the hospitals are older, and so we wanted to be sure that they would stand up. And going through the pandemic, seeing our system stressed and trying to make sure that we can provide the health care the residents need and deserve, motivated the investment.
Representative Matsumoto, you mentioned the preschool thing. What else was done for education that you think should be noticed?
Well, before we get that, one of my favorite bills was the Interstate Medical Compact Licensure Bill for out-of-state doctors to be able to work here. And if we're talking about the physician shortage, I think that was something that was crucial to really helping, as well as the telehealth that we passed. And so I think those were some great things that we did. But when we're talking about education, I do think the preschool was one of the biggest game changers, especially because we were having preschool open doors now for 3-year-olds. And if nobody's had somebody in preschool for a while, I can tell you for one kid, it's about $15,000 to $20,000 a year. So if you have 2 kids in preschool, you're looking at almost $40,000 a year for your kids going to preschool. And so increasing access as well, so increasing the supply of preschools. I know when we put my son in, he was number 50 on the wait list. So just the supply of preschools that we have is such a big issue. And I know if you don't have little kids, it's something that people don't think about day in and day out. But I think that bill was a huge win for the legislature for education.
Chad, what would you say about education issues?
Well, I'm still kind of scratching my head over what happened with the budget. the money for the University of Hawaii and the money for the Department of Education. According to some of the representatives, there were drastic cuts made. There was mention of the compensation for the Hawaii State Teachers Association. And then we heard later from you and some of the leadership in the House that actually there will be money for DOE, and there was mention of this slush fund. So was money cut for UH and DOE?
Are you looking at me or the Senate President?
He looked at you. I'm looking at
The budget is approved by both. The question is to both of you. But what I heard on the floor from folks like Amy Peruso and others is that how can you defund these so important institutions, no two greater institutions in UH and DOE, and it's by tens of millions of dollars. And I'm unclear because I don't think the budget has been posted completely yet online, has it yet?
No, the budget worksheets will probably be available on Monday, Monday afternoon.
Is it possible to answer then, were there cuts?
I'll take up the DOE question. At the end of, on that Friday, the DOE came in and said that they were short $57 million in the first year of the budget. And that $57 million was based upon the difference between what the governor had requested in his budget for DOE versus what the legislature approved. When you look at the dollars, the DOE's budget is dollar-wise is higher than last year, and it will be higher for the next couple of years. But the $57 million shortfall was based upon
comparing it to the
governor's request, and the legislature. We don't always approve what any governor requests through their budget requests. So it's that's an area where I think we'll have to continue to work on. We have to remember that once we approve the budget then goes to the governor. The governor is responsible for implementing and executing the budget, and the governor has a number of tools available to make up for shortfalls. And it's up to the governor at this point to manage the finances.
Senator Koche, as I recall, though, at the end of session, we talked to Senator Kidani, and she said that there were a lot of other items in the budget that even if it wasn't adequately funded for the general education budget, there were other new things in the legislature that kind of makes up and helps support education in other ways. For example, teacher housing, for example.
Well, there was $170 million, and there were 3 parcels identified with infrastructure that would be ready to go in Mililani, Waipahu, and Nanakuli. The rest of us are looking in our districts for projects that are ready to go, and the cost of housing I was just talking to someone who met with Danny Hamada, who's the superintendent on Kauai, and he lost 28 teachers before the start of the school year who wanted to come and could not find housing to make that work. So that investment is critical to having enough teachers in our schools. Senator Kidani also said, if you look at the weighted student formula, which is the amount of money we spend on each student in an individual classroom, there is going to be more money in the weighted student formula this year than there was last year. So some of the reductions are because their utility costs have risen, and some of it is cuts on the administrative side, but the budget that's crafted, I think it'll bear out in the worksheets. We wanted to be sure the students are getting what they need.
Colin Moore, how do you feel education fared in this legislature?
Not as well as at least I would have hoped for. I mean, I don't think it was...
Because you work at UH.
Because I work at UH. So yeah, sure, I'll talk about my own employer here. I do think there's a little bit of disappointment at UH. I think they were hoping for somewhat more generous funding given the surplus, things like the full Hawaii Promise program, expanding that.
What is that?
That's to cover in-state tuition for Hawaii residents. I think that there was disappointment certainly at UH Manoa that the full funding wasn't totally restored, that I think there was some expectation that the university would get a little more money than it ended up. I mean, and certainly the House draft of that bill was more generous than the conference draft ended up. So sure, I mean, talking to faculty at UH, I think that, you know, there's shared disappointment, and I think there was some disappointment about how some of the CIP projects were allocated, more that went to the community colleges, fewer to Manoa.
Chad, let's move on to the tourism situation. It looked like they were going to go and blow it all up, and it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, but, you know, I was in that conference room. I said Sean Quinlan on your side and Linda Coit, I think, and they were the lead conferees.
We were both in there, actually, at that moment, but yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's where you and I were talking, because there was John DeFries was there from the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And it was not a friendly conversation. Both of them looked very disappointed, and there was not agreement reached on essentially dissolving the HTA, creating this new entity within DBED. And at the same time, you had the funding change dramatically for the HTA. Of course, that happened last year. Was it just last year that that funding mechanism was changed? It sounds like the governor will be able to draw some money, perhaps $30 million, but the HTA has been getting $60 million. Contracts are going forward. That was another issue that just sort of dominated a lot of the conversations. The Star Advertiser alone probably published dozens of stories about that. And at the end, there was no agreement reached and less money for the agency that markets for our greatest industry.
Senate President, what happened with the HTA? It seemed like both sides wanted to do something. It didn't look that far apart to me. What happened?
Well,
That's
last quarter mile is the hardest distance to cover. But I think what is reflected is really the larger debate that's happening in our community. Tourism, without question, is the largest driver for our economy. But the expectation from the residents about tourism driving everything at the expense of everyone else is not something that they want to accept after the big COVID timeout that we had. Regenerative tourism is important. Malama Hawaii and the cultural aspect is important. And then I think back to former Mayor Yukimura, who used to say, keep Kauai, Kauai. And then when you asked what did that mean, well, everybody had their own opinion of what keeping Kauai, Kauai was. So what is Malama Hawaii? And I think the inability to come together just shows that, you know, everybody has a little different view of what that should be and what's right for our community.
I think the other component was the green fee, which was, again, no pun intended, a priority of the governor. And
I think
that
the pun was intended.
Yeah, okay, it was intended. Session's over. But that was another bill that died in the waning hours and not agreeing, because that's what we're talking about, is trying to take care of the INA and protect the only resources we really have. And again, that dominated the discussion as well, differences of dollar figures between the governor, between the House and the Senate. Speaker?
Yeah, so the legislature approved a couple of initiatives. One was to fund the creation of a statewide app that we run by DLNR to categorize all of the parks and trails that are accessible to the public. I think that the app will give us the infrastructure that will lead to the creation of a green fee at some point. It was premature to create a green fee because there was so much, like HTA, there was so many points of contention about the green fee issue. But for now, we'll set up the infrastructure through the app. Second, the legislature appropriated $170 million to DLNR to improve our parks and trails.
Colin?
My impression about the HTA debate is that the legislature really isn't quite sure where it wants to go with tourism governance. And this is an incredibly complex issue, right? I mean, HTA, the irony, I think, is HTA has actually pivoted pretty dramatically in the destination management direction. I mean, being more of a careful steward of the INA. But tourism governance is incredibly complicated, right? To do it right, you need coordination across state agencies, and you need coordination across levels of government, county government and state government. And there's no place we can really look to find, you know, a comparable off-the-shelf example. Hawaii is unique here. We can look internationally, but we can't do things that places like Palau can do. And so, I mean, what I had hoped the legislature would fund this year is a really serious study of tourism governance models, because I think we need, you know, a blue ribbon commission, much like the Ethics Commission, on tourism governance proposals that then can be examined.
Actually, HTA just passed something like that the other day.
Not quite as ambitious as I would like, but yes.
I'm sure
yes.
HTA will come up something that eliminates HTA. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, unlikely.
Laura, you want to add anything to the tourism debate, or should I move on?
I think the only thing I'll say is part of the part that was confusing is what would changing the name from Hawaii Tourism Authority to Hawaii Destination Management really do? I don't think I was clear on what the plan truly was. And HTA had come out and done a town hall in my district, and the work that they have been doing, like you'd mentioned, Colin, on destination management, they really have been doing things as they move forward. But for me, I think that was some of the confusion. What is the plan? Is it just a name change, or is that really going to be something significant? So looking forward, like with the app, to see what happens. And
I think we did an insight show on this issue, and what the conclusion seemed to be is that people have a really oversized expectation of what an agency that's semi-autonomous can even do. It really is a government function to manage tourism. Aloha Stadium has been asked by Mike and Makiki. Senate President, what happened with Aloha Stadium?
Well, we're going to be going forward with the budgeted amount not to exceed $400 million. We're going to get outside developer.
I thought it was back down to 350.
350. 350. Well, not to exceed 400, 350.
It's close enough.
Well, the governor was talking about putting some money out of his slush fund, but you guys haven't talked about that yet?
No, the governor can't, because the reserve fund can only be used for government operations, not government construction.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So you guys still, at this House, you guys still have to talk to the governor about, though, how the Aloha Stadium contracts move forward. That still has not been concluded.
Well, I think the governor has
private partnership.
The governor has a plan to issue one RFP to construct the stadium at a cost of $350 million. So he'll have to see what kind of proposals come in based on those parameters.
I had another question that was very interesting along the lines of the corruption question. And here, a recent story in Civil Beat, that federal investigators continue to focus on legislature for possible corruption cases. Go ahead, Chad, talk about where that stands, and then let's all talk about what the legislature did in the wake of the bribery scandal.
Well, that was indeed reported by Civil Beat. Thanks for the plug. And that story ran the day after session. And yes, the gist of it is that the investigations tied to Ty Cullen, to Kalani English, we didn't get a whole lot of details. But my editor, Patty Epler, reported that it is continuing. And
well, you guys did something with the PDF so you could read something you weren't supposed to read, and that's kind of what I got out of it.
That's right.
Congratulations.
That's right. And our editor negotiated with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's all explained in the story. But I think to the main point, this does tie back to the Commission to Improve Standards, the so-called Foley Commission. And there were some significant bills that did make it through. Some reform on lobbyists, greater disclosure. You're going to have a voter's guide, digital, not mailed to people, but any number of things. And that's to their credit. But we had hoped at Civil Beat that there would be more progress on those sunshine bills. We mentioned the comprehensive financing of elections. Another one that I think was very important that also died in the waning hours mysteriously was the one to really reduce or even waive the copying fee when someone wants to obtain public records to find out what their government is doing. That includes the media, that includes average citizens, and that died. And that's another bill that was mucked up as well during the conference committee period. Again, no testimony outside of the public.
Glad you avoided expletives with that one.
You want me to add something to that?
Go ahead, yes, please.
I love to rebut Chad.
We all do, but go ahead.
But on public financing, that was not a recommendation of the Foley Commission. In fact, the Foley Commission had a debate on the extent of public financing and couldn't reach a consensus. So there was no recommendation. Second, on the government record copying bill, the problem with that bill and the reason why it died in conference was because at the very last minute, one of the committees added in a part 2. They added a new part 2 to the section that would have created what is called the deliberative process privilege. So by adding this part 2 into the bill, there was a direct violation of Civil Beat's lawsuit, Legal Voters versus State, that that prohibits us from doing that. So that's why that bill died.
Okay,
But I would just add real quickly that those sunshine bills weren't limited to the 31 or 33 from the Foley Commission. There were more than 200, and that public financing bill arguably would have made the greatest change, making elections more competitive against incumbents that have so much money from PACs, unions, developers, and so forth.
Well, the Foley Commission proposed 33, had 33 proposals, and the legislature approved 26 of those through new laws, and a number of them we implemented, the president and I implemented through our rules.
I just want to ask Lauren Matsumoto, from what those new laws that have been passed, new rules, do you see improvement in the conduct of the legislature?
Well, I think that they say the proof is going to be in the pudding. We'll see what happens as we go through. A lot of it was with campaign spending, right? And you talked about the lobbyists, but something I would have liked to see more discussion on is the term limits. The 16-year term limit that was proposed. And then again, really looking at what the balance of the legislature is. I think when you're seeing for the corruption case is when one side is in power for too long, you have really great legislators, but then there's others who feel untouchable and end up doing things that they really shouldn't be doing. And so we'll see what happens as we go through. I know we've done a lot with the House rules. We talked through that to make sure that we're looking through some of those issues, but I think we're going to have to see it as it comes to this next session and this next election.
If I remember correctly, the Republicans in the House actually backed every single one of the Foley Commission bills. Is that correct?
We did. So we put in every single one. And then we even went one step further and we set a 12-year term limit just to put that in. But we did put in every single one of the recommendations from the Foley Commission.
Senate President, do you think that we are much less likely to run into a bribery scandal now than we were before?
I think, everybody realizes there's a lot more attention on everything everybody's doing at every level. And then with social media and the ability to communicate instantly and at no cost. One of the big obstacles was it was so expensive to get messages out. And now, people can get their message out. I think, what was it, Speaker? House Bill 676? The one where we looked at giving the counties some more authority on not going to the Land Use Commission. And as that got changed, there was tremendous email traffic, all the concerns raised about what happened. At the end, both chambers recommitted the bill and said, we still want to get to affordable housing units quicker, but it needs to have a better public discussion and hopefully a path that we get buy-in and people are diligently watching everything we do besides the press.
Colin, 30 seconds on this issue?
So my disappointment with publicly financed elections is it pretty much went easily through all the committees and then was killed in conference. I would have liked a more robust discussion. I know there was concerns about how much it was going to cost, but I think that, and I know a lot of advocates were really disappointed that it really seemed to kind of mysteriously die even after it made it all the way through.
I think the question is whether lawmakers will ever make it easier for people to run against them.
But some states have done this. I mean, Connecticut did it, other states have done this. It's not unheard of.
Well, in public financing, I did receive some emails from people, and it's, from Democrats who said, I don't want my tax dollars funding a MAGA Republican campaign, and vice versa. So this is exactly why the Foley Commission couldn't reach a consensus on this issue.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through some questions that may not have a lot of cohesion from question to question because they're all coming in. Why did no bills to stop illegal vacation rentals go forward? House Tourism Committee had several good bills. Do you folks pay much attention to that, Speaker?
Well, it's a county issue.
Everybody kind of feels that way. Okay.
But the city and county is much more aggressive now. Kauai County has led during this window of enforcement, and I think all of the counties have done a much better job in the last 2 years on this issue.
Another economic diversity question from KC on Facebook. We did talk a little bit about economic diversity, but specifically higher paying jobs for locals like in film, TV, and digital content music. There wasn't, what happened to the effort to support a film studio project? Did that get through? Because there was the big film studio that was trying to get entitlements.
I think that's a private studio. So coming from somebody who graduated from the Academy for Creative Media from the University of Hawaii, I mean, film is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I think when we talk about diversifying the economy, that's the place where we really should start. And when you look at other states like Georgia, where they have no cap on their tax credit, now with AI and all those things, we're not having that unique quality about having the backdrop of Hawaii. And I think we really need to be more on the cutting edge, look at our tax cap again, and look at really helping those private production studios who want to build a large film studio here, to help those who go through the Academy for Creative Media be able to get a job and not run for the legislature.
You know, I'm kind of surprised because I don't think generally people are that interested in legislative process, but a lot of our questions are about the process. I think probably because we brought up the chaos at the end. Comment on the budget. If you're still waiting for worksheets on the budget, it appears that the legislature did not know what they were voting on. That's Dan in Pearl City. Is that someone saying that the emperor has no clothes, Senate President? I mean, have we ever known fully everything that's in the budget when it's been voted on?
Not every single page to every single line item, and you know, we have the different committee chairs that work with the Ways and Means chairs to flesh out the priorities. We present the highlights, but not to every single line that's in the budget on $38 billion.
So the worksheets historically provide detail on what has been approved through the budget bill, and the legislature began posting the worksheets maybe 15, 17 years ago. So they have always been available online once they've been approved.
Chad, you were there. I mean, did anybody have any idea what was in that budget other than the two chairs?
I was on the House floor for that last day, and what I heard from the speaker's colleagues, and as well on the minority side as well, is they didn't know what they were voting for entirely. And I think this goes to that whole thing about transparency and accountability. Voting on something that they're not going to see all the details until later. I mean, why wasn't that budget settled earlier in session? It often is settled before conference committee because it's holding up so many things. And that was frustrating to a lot of people.
Colin, you know, you were talking earlier about full-time versus part-time legislature. Do you think this lack of transparency is almost entirely a function of having almost not enough time or not efficient use of time?
I don't think all entirely, but I think it would help. I mean, I think that there is sometimes an excuse that the time pressure leads to a lack of transparency. I think, you know, a continuously meeting legislature might provide more time for everyone to get a clear look at the bill. I mean, look, that doesn't always happen in Congress. It doesn't happen in every legislature that meets full time. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, I don't think that was entirely the problem here. I mean, I think some of it was the inexperience of some of the new legislators. But look, I think it could help. I think it could help in other ways too. I mean, the legislature would be able to address problems as they come up. I mean, one unique thing about Hawaii is the legislature has a lot of power for just a short amount of time, and then pretty much it's turned over to the governor to run the state for the rest of the year. I would like the legislature to be more part of the conversation for the whole year.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Nope.
The only thing, you know, to Chad's point, when we've taken a look back on Tuesday and discussed this in leadership, we do think that if we can get a budget agreement a little sooner, then it would hopefully help to get to better decision making. And again, back to first time everybody's going through the process and learning each other's moves, if you will, and you know, so I'm optimistic we're going to do a better job. If we're not, we'll pay a terrible price in the election next year when we gavel out.
For the budget process, when we're in conference committee, the budget conference consists of House members and Senate members. There are 15 House members on the conference committee. I think there's 11 senators on the Senate side, and they meet to basically make agreements on the budget. I think there's a couple of things that we should consider doing in the future. One is maybe the conference committee should go line by line when they're approving the budget in conference. The second thing is to approve expenditures through appropriation bills as opposed to putting everything into the budget. So I think those two changes would help to open up the process a little bit.
How much of a problem, Lauren Matsumoto, Minority Leader, is that for a member, and particularly a member of the Minority Caucus, in terms of knowing what's going on?
Well, I think, unfortunately, that's pretty much what happens every year. So I think when Speaker was talking about looking at the process of what we can do a little bit differently going forward, I know there was a big kind of blow up on the House floor, a lot of conversation around the budget. But again, this has kind of always been the process, and that's not saying it's right. I think there's something we really need to look at what we do, because, I mean, it's a huge budget if we're talking about $38 billion and we're looking at really changing the shape of Hawaii. And so I think putting, again, the things into actual bills where it's a little bit easier for the public to understand as well. The legislative process is such a difficult, convoluted process that even when we try to bring about transparency, it is still really confusing. So I think the more we can simplify it, but also a lot of public education needs to happen.
Well, I've just given a Republican the last word. Don't forget. Mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight, and we thank our guests, Representative Lauren Matsumoto, Senator Ron Kochi, and Colin Moore, Representative Scott Psyche, and Chad Blair of Civil Beat. Next week, we will discuss the growing fentanyl crisis in Hawaii. The drug has been linked to numerous overdoses and deaths, so what can be done to combat it here in the islands? Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.